Today we'll spend time with three gentlemen who are joining me already here on stage for their newest book, The Diamond Miracle on the Boulevard, which is available for sale and for signature today. So I hope you'll join us in purchasing that. And I'll start off by introducing these gentlemen, and then I'll join them for some questions. But we'll be sure to leave plenty of time at the end for you all to jump in with your questions as well. We have with us Randy Hallman, fourth-generation newspaperman. He was a reporter and editor for the Richmond Times-Dispatch, and prior to that, he was with the Richmond News Leader before his retirement in 2016 from the Collective. His 4-decade-plus tenure at the two daily newspapers included 15 years as a sports writer. He's a lifelong Cincinnati Reds fan, which I will not hold against you, since you just shared your deep passion. But his own baseball career included an epic Little League game in which he had 3 straight hits, including a triple, I hear. But with the potential tying run at second, he took a third strike for the final out of the game, which I think still hangs with him as a dark cloud. A very tough blow for an aspiring Little Leaguer. Phil Stanton was employed by the Richmond Braves from 1986 until '88, and he's worked in athletic communications for Randolph-Macon College, the University of Richmond, and Virginia Commonwealth University. This is remarkable, he's also a longtime Cincinnati Reds fan. And learned at an early age that he would be better at keeping stats than he would be creating them on the field. That's wise foresight there. He's also a co-founder and editor of collegebaseballinsider.com. Bobby Ukrop, the finalist of our panel here, is a second-generation grocer and chairman and CEO, food manufacturer Ukrop's Homestyle Foods. Really needs no introduction here in Richmond. He's lived here his whole life, and his love of family, sports, and community building has led him to join with other Richmonders with passion to take on this special project to enhance the quality of life in the region. I will join these gentlemen now, and we'll get started. And I'll begin right at the beginning of your book. This is really a wonderful piece, and I have to say from the outset that you've found a great balance of timeless imagery of the history leading up to the diamond, but then throughout its to present day. So plenty of flying squirrels in this book to be found. In the beginning of this book, right in the first page, you state that born out of crisis, the community-wide effort to build the region's sparkling jewel, the diamond, showed what could happen with regional cooperation, a public-private partnership, and grassroots support of the citizenry. Conceived in late spring of 1983, as was I, agreed upon... Scary. Agreed upon in the spring of 1984, designed the summer and constructed by the end of the season, the very next season, less than 8 months, which is quite remarkable. The diamond opened in April 17, 1985. It was a miracle, you say. So why don't we start right there? Bobby, I'll start with you. Drawing from the title, Miracle on the Boulevard, add some more flavor to this. Tell us more about your thoughts of why this project was such a miracle and how it was pulled off in such a way.
Okay. Well, thank you for asking. And thank all of you for coming. I look out there. There are a lot of people out in this audience that were involved in this project in one way or the other. In fact, if you'd raise your hand if somehow you were connected at all with the Braves back then, designing the diamond, and you went to Parker Field. Anybody go to Parker Field? So that shows you a lot of these people were born before you were even born. So a lot of people had a hand in this, and that's the reason it was a success. But first of all, you go back to that time again. You weren't born, but our jurisdictions didn't really work together that great at times. We had just done the airport was just done. That was but that really didn't serve the masses of people. But that was a real positive thing. We had President Reagan was running for re-election. You think back then, he was a president, and you were also thinking about the Olympics coming up in '84. So there was a general mood for things maybe to happen. The airport had just happened, and the 3 jurisdictions did come together: Henrico, Chesterfield, and Richmond. And that was one thing. The second thing, very quickly and under the radar, the General Assembly in that time frame in early '84 passed legislation to allow the RMA to be involved in the ballpark project. And that was critical for financing. Then the private sector agreed to a 50-50 split with the jurisdictions on this project. Again, people were working together. And they hadn't been doing that so well. And then the private sector and the grassroots effort of involving thousands and thousands of Richmonders really came together in 5 months and yielded $4 million to pay the other half of the $8 million project. And then the most amazing thing, it got built at the end of August 31st, 1984, and then it opened again in 85, less than 8 months. We had a mild winter. Well, you think about all those things, how did all those things happen? And so, really, in less than 2 years since Carlton Moffett called, when he was president of the chamber, called a meeting of business and community leaders to talk about the fact that there's a threat that the Braves might be leaving town. In less than 2 years, all that happened. So that in itself, we thought that was a miracle. And so the reason this book was written is because in 2003, the Stadium Operating Committee had approved an $18 million renovation to the Diamond. And it had been signed, sealed, and almost delivered when a person in city government met with some people down in Chaco and said, maybe we ought to do something different. So it pulled back. And so for 15 years, we've been a lot of talk. And so I guess as people have come up to me and others and have said, we ought to tell that story. Maybe there's something in that story that can help us as a community work our way through some of these projects that can really bring us together, not divide us. And so that's really kind of the genesis. And we didn't really think about it being a miracle back then. Everybody was hustling, trying to make it happen. But you look back and say, how did that happen? And it happened because you pitched in to build a new ballpark.
Well, that's wonderful. And I would say that is a fair assessment to be a miracle to have something move that quickly. But I'm assuming, in looking at the book as well, there was motivating factors that were pushing to the point of crisis that really started the whole process. So tell me what was happening with Parker Field. We had some that have seen the field.
Well,
what was that change agent?
I would tell you that I've got studies in here that 1974, 1975, 1978, and there was another study commissioned in late 1983 called the Zakelli-Hunter study. And we talk about that in the book. But what really happened in '83, we had this young general manager that named Richard Anderson, who had come to Richmond, and he was he was an exciting young man in his 20s when he was hired here, and he liked to make things happen. And so I didn't even know him at the time, but he somehow had the ear of the sports writers and other people, and but I think the best way to tell that story is that Richard Anderson lit the fire. So Richard is here all the way from Seattle, where he is head of Seafair in Seattle. Come on up, Richard. He was 31 at the time. I was 37. We were clueless. That's true. Good. But tell him, it's in the book. It talks about the water in the dugout, and he was the guy that lit the fire.
Well, that's way overstated, but thank you.
No, it isn't.
I do want to say this real quick, and I know we'll get a chance to say a couple of things, but this is really about Phil and Randy and Bobby and what they've done in putting this book together, and I've been clearly on the sidelines. But this is an example of people checking their egos at the door and doing the right thing for something bigger than themselves. It was about, we were in the memory-making business. That's all we were doing, running a ballpark. We weren't curing cancer, but it was a place for people to come together and have amazing times to escape the craziness of the day. And probably everybody in this room can say, I remember when, I saw Dale Murphy, or I remember when. And I had a chance, in fact, I want to ask them if I could just real quick to stand up, and Phil, you got to do this as well, but Cheryl, Joanne right there, please stand up a second. Jimmy Mack and MJ, you're back there somewhere too. Please stand up a second. Is there anybody else that was right behind us, anybody else that was on the staff? So what I want to tell you is, like, these 4 people and 10 or 12 others like them, we weren't making any money, and we just showed up and we cared. And, so I get way too much credit for all of this. It was them and people like Bobby and Dick Hollander and so many others that stood up. And so please give them a hand. Thank you for amazing. I I had the privilege of getting to take all the credit for the stuff they did, and I know that sounds like, yeah, he's saying that. No, it has the benefit of being true. Like, they really did all the work, and if you really talk to him, MJ will tell you the truth. He would tell you, yeah, that's actually true. You know, it really gets down to what do you live your life for? And what inspired me most of all in this whole process was getting a chance to get close to Bobby Ukrop. And he's the first true servant leader I ever knew. I couldn't understand, like, well, why are you doing all this? There's got to be some profit motivation, right? No, it's about, I want to make a difference. I've been put on this earth to do something good, and I want to make a difference in other people's lives, and, you know, things will just work out. So the miracle on the Boulevard is way more than brick and mortar. It's way more than how this money got raised and how amazing it was. It's about a group of people that came together to do something way bigger than themselves, to make a small difference in a community. Bobby didn't even like baseball, truthfully. He told me the first time we talked, he'd rather watch paint dry. He really said that. And yet, he wanted to make a difference in the community. So to these 5 people I had to work with, and the 8 or so other ones that couldn't be here today, and to Phil and Randy and Bobby for putting this book together. Ultimately, what I'd say is, like, I got way too much credit for anything that went well, and there were a lot of things that didn't go well that I deserved to take some heat for, but I got away with. We were actually talking about some of those earlier. At the end of the day, what we did was we, in some small way, made a difference in the quality of life in the community, and how you could use that, and how people that, these millennials and Gen Zs that are coming behind us can use that, is to think about, it's not about me, like Bobby taught us. It's about them. It's about doing something bigger than ourselves, and that's really the miracle on the Boulevard.
Excellent, wonderful. Well, thank you, and welcome to the
I'm
panel.
thrilled to be here.
So I'm going to jump to Randy now. Randy, the name, when I arrived in Richmond, the diamond, no one could explain to me the genesis of that. And so going through the book, I know that you devote some time to that. So do you now know the story behind the diamond? Give us a little bit of flavor on that.
Well, Jamie, thanks, and thanks for having me here, and thanks for all of you coming. It's a good question, and the answer is we know how it happened, but we don't know who gave us the name. And it occurred to me that coming here for this occasion, maybe that person is in the crowd. Maybe somebody in the room is the person who wrote the letter that named the diamond. If you are here, please stand up. Or if your dad or your mom or your brother or your sister did it, please let us know.
Or be bold and just take credit. No one else has in 30 years.
Yeah, but there's one catch. Randy will tell you what the catch is.
We have a little controlling factor on that. We didn't reveal, we still have not revealed, and it wasn't revealed at the time, how the anonymous writer signed the letter. It was a little descriptive phrase, and you have to know that to take credit. But it did happen that way. What happened was Finnegan and Agee, the advertising agency, had taken over the publicity for the ballpark, and started, well, what are we going to name it? It's Parker Field. Are we going to name it Parker Field 2? Well, that's not so great. And so they started looking for a name. They made some rules about how it would be named. They didn't want it named for an individual. They wanted it to be memorable and positive and simple. And they ruled out, thank goodness, they ruled out a combination of the localities' names. Like we didn't want Chess-Henrich Metropolitan Stadium. For one thing, they would have fought over whether it would be that or Hen-Chess-Rich Metropolitan. So we didn't, they spared us that. And then they formed a committee that met and looked at the suggestions that were offered. And Bob Dahlstadt, who was with Enrico government, was there with the group that was reading the letters and sorting through, and he's the one who picked up this anonymous, carefully printed letter and saw the name The Diamond. And he immediately was struck by it. He thought, well, the game is over, this is it. And Richard Anderson said the same thing. As soon as he heard it from Bob in that room, he was in awe of it. He said he thought that's just right, and the momentum built there, and then from that room, it went out, and not everybody, but many who were deciding figured that's what we're going to call it. And despite one of the local radio stations decided to have some fun and say, "Oh, that's terrible. Let's get something new," we stuck with the Diamond. That was the name we got, and I think it is a classic name. It's there were quite a few others. Candlelight. I guess somebody liked the Giants and liked Candlestick, so we'd be Candlelight, and Friendship Park, and I can't remember, but there were like several others who were sort of designated as finalists. But it was always, once the Diamond was there, it was the Diamond, and that's what they stuck with.
Did they give their motivation? Was it more than just the obvious baseball connectivity of the?
You got to read the book.
We'll talk about that. It was that sort of gleaming positive idea of what a diamond is in both senses. It's the baseball diamond, and it's the diamond, the jewel of the community. There was also, I think there was just the idea of what it would not be. Had a lot to do with it as well. It was they didn't want it to try to describe everything about how it was built.
Yeah. Right. So I think like sometimes people don't see the forest for the trees, and I think sometimes process is really important, but sometimes, and everybody was trying to stick to the process because Finnegan and Agee was giving us their expert advice, and in the book it talks about the different names and the process and all this. But when Bob saw it, we kind of reluctant to say, let's jump in and go for it. Let the process work. But clearly, it was the front runner, and it was like, that's what we need, and somebody's got to really show us something else to get by. And I think in life sometimes we can process ourselves to death, and at some point you got to seize the day. It's carpe diem, and that's what happened when that name came out.
Excellent.
I think too, probably the number two name in terms of how many people wanted it was Frank Soden. It would have been Soden Stadium, and Frank was the legendary Richmond radio and ballpark announcer, and his name is on the press box at the park, and he was incredibly gracious about it. I mean, I think he knew that many people said, "Oh, Frank, they should name it for you," but he wrote a letter that's also in the book and talked about to Bobby saying, "Oh, thank you for the name of the press box. It's such an honor," and didn't even mention. And oh, by the way, you could have named the ballpark for him. But I think that, again, is that sort of community-wide feeling about the park. Frank's a wonderful person, and it's fitting that his name is there, forever with us in the press box. But the ballpark was for all of us, and it was our park, and I think that was reflected.
Nice. Well, Phil, the question for you now. We've seen this happen time and time again when communities have rallied around a new sports complex or a civic building of some kind. There's a great deal of analysis that goes into the feasibility of such a project. And now it's these massive projects of $600 million to build a ballpark or whatever it is, but on a different scale, but nonetheless important. Tell us about how the local municipalities were able to be a part of this and to commit to this, and how did they have an appreciation for what an attraction this could be or would be?
Well, Bobby had mentioned that the government officials did get along pretty well at that point. They had worked together for the airport. There were several people that felt like it should be the city's total responsibility because the ballpark was within the city limits. Harry Daniel, who was on the Board of Supervisors from Chesterfield County, was also a Little League coach. And so he would often bring his team to Parker Field to games. And he said he would see his neighbors, he would see other Little League coaches from Chesterfield County. So he knew that there were people coming from Chesterfield County to Parker Field. Bill Leidinger was a member of the Richmond City Council. He had been city manager earlier in the early 70s, but in the early 80s he was city councilman. And he felt like that there were people coming from the counties as well. And so where now you may have a more scientific procedure for trying to figure out the percentages that came, as I'm sure all of you remember, you used to have stickers on your car that would indicate whether you were from the city of Richmond or Chesterfield County, Henrico County. And so what Bill did with some of his cohorts was to go in the parking lot and look at the cars that were at Braves games. And they realized by doing that there really was a very high percentage coming from Chesterfield County and a very high percentage that were coming from Henrico County as well. So I think that helped and Bill was kind of the driving force to get the two counties to come on board. But they realized how valuable it was for the area, not just for the city of Richmond, for the area. So that helped in terms of getting them to cooperate. And it turned out that the three jurisdictions ended up splitting that $4 million that each of them paid a third to cover what half of the cost would be for the diamond.
Excellent. Now, I know we also have another special guest that's with us, Tom Hanson, who was a structural engineer on the project, who, as I'm told, watched it like a hawk. And so I'd like to ask Bobby and Richard both to chime in on this as you'd wish, talking about the positivity of the teamwork and the collaboration across governments and private and public partnerships. But let's talk a little more about the construction of the park. And going up in 8 months seems like an amazing feat, not just for the partnership, but for the actual assembly of a structure of that size. So what were the big challenges, and tell us a little more about how it all happened.
Well, I would say this, the picture you're back in April of the spring of '84, and people have agreed, let's build a new ballpark. Counties are together, private sector say, yeah, let's go do it. Well, you got to do RFPs, you got to design the thing, you got to get somebody to, we had the design build type situation, and all this is, we talk about that. Richard and I knew zero about that. Dick Hollander did, he knew right much about it. But the whole idea, it hadn't really clear. We need to have people bidding on this thing in June, and we hadn't raised a nickel at the time, and they're saying, yeah, right, y'all gonna get this done. And so, but they went ahead, and then very quickly they put together, and is anybody here from Baskerville? Is Dave Sands or Dave Smith here? But they were integrally involved, as was Tom, and then McDivitt and Street was the contractor. But they were doing this really, really fast. That's not the way that things happen in Richmond so quickly like that. And so, so why they did it, I'm not sure. And then somebody must have been looking for business, but that they worked together. So Tom, and I think it's a 100-year structure, is that right? 4 years. It's 100, so, yeah, at least. But anyway, he did watch it like a hawk, and people cared, as Richard said, people cared about how that got done. But in June, we agreed kind of on a design. At that point, we still hadn't raised $1 million. And people were saying, well, why are we doing this if you haven't raised this money? But people bought super boxes. And we have someone here today who worked at Ethel back then, and they bought box number 8 back then. But we had a lot of other people. I've got the list here. That it's in the book. But the point is that people would all of a sudden would say, how do we make this work instead of how do we throw a wrench into it? And so, but then once they started tearing it down, the final, is anybody there the final night in '84? I see a hand back in the back. People started tearing up the place. I'll pitch it to Richard because he can tell you about that 8 months, or 7 to 8 months, and it was amazing.
Yeah, and I'd also say, piggybacking on what Phil said earlier about the public-private partnership, and I was thinking about Bill Leidinger, who did great things to help get this happen. But the truth of the matter is, and I may have a little bit different perspective, the public sector didn't lead this. The reason this got done, and the reason it gets done anywhere, is when the private sector steps up, when citizens like all of you or any of us steps up and want something for a community, the public sector's job, the elected officials' job, is to figure out how to make it happen. Their job's not to get out on that shaky limb and fight for something, because all they're going to do is isolate one another. So I see really the impetus for how the diamond got built was a Bobby Ukrop stepped up, and he had no skin in the game, and he wanted this to happen, and he was willing to go help raise the money for it. And there was a lot of energy and dozens of other people that joined that fight, and it became something that was a visionary experience for us to get it built. So as it spun into the construction, the reason great folks like Tom, like Baskerville and Sons, like McDevitt Street and others stepped up was because they wanted to be a part of this. This was no like throw in. This became a big deal. This became exciting for the community. This ballpark's going to get built. I want to be on that. There was an intense competition for the design of the ballpark. Baskerville and Son won it. And by the way, I have not been in that ballpark, I'm embarrassed to say, as much as I love this town, and I love Richmond. It's the greatest place, truly greatest place I've lived in. I've lived a few places. I haven't been in that ballpark in 30 years. And I went last night and I walked around, and I have a lot of things that I won't share now because I want to save time for all the other comments, but it was just so cool to see it. And then I drove out on the interstate. I drove down 95 from south to north, and architecturally, structurally, to this day, it is still one of the coolest sports venues you will ever see. And I've had a chance to, since who would have known, but had a chance to lead or be a part of some of the biggest and best, including PNC Park in Pittsburgh, which is now ranked as the #1 ballpark, and Petco Park and Joe Robbie Stadium and so on. They don't hold a candle, in my view, to the structure of that ballpark. So 8 months, how did that happen? Baskerville and Son was passionate. They wanted it to happen. And what we did was we went to the people that were going to use those spaces. If we didn't know anything, the one thing we were smart enough to do was we went and we got the media together. Tom Hargercourt and Bill Deacons were the beat writers at that time, and Mills Sapps and Jennings Cully were the sports editors. And we went to them with a list of questions and asked them, if you were going to build a perfect press box, you live up there, what would you want? And we went to the clubhouse attendant. If you were going to design the perfect clubhouse, what would you want? And we created ownership amongst the people that lived in those areas. We didn't do it perfectly, but what was really cool was when that building opened, everybody that used the specific spaces that they used weren't given something they'd never seen before. Guess what? They felt like they designed it. So there was a positive energy around their space. Yeah, I'm the one that figured out how these went. I can hear Hargercourt now talking about the press box, and it really worked out brilliantly. So we had a lot of things in the mild winter and all, and they used some very cutting edge techniques, at least as far as I knew, like tilt and pour, and they were able to do a lot of things on site. And we built around the existing ball field. So when opening day came, for those of you who were there, you have no idea how many things weren't actually finished yet. But to you, it looked really good. And to MJ and Jimmy Mack and Cheryl and Joanne and the rest of us, Phil included, we spent the next 4 or 5 months trying to make sure you didn't figure out the things we hadn't finished yet. And ultimately, it became quite a community jewel.
But there was almost a lawsuit. Well, there was a lawsuit before on August 31st. There was a threat on a part of a contractor about whether or not we could even start that. And I mentioned that having Dick Hollander, who was the person who brought the U.S. He was the key person in bringing the U.S. a Russian track meet to the Coliseum. Y'all remember that many years ago? He was the guy. His involvement with the Olympic Committee. So he was the guy that was a steady hand over 2 young guys like Richard, myself, and others who didn't know what they were doing.
Full-time job.
Yeah, and so, but people really trusted. He was an older fellow. How old was he? He's like 50-some?
He seemed he seemed really young now.
Yeah, but I don't know any of his family's here, but he was the guy that was a steady hand, and he would tell the other lawyers no, or he would tell us no. And he kept, it was the RMA, the people that work with the financing, all those people trusted Dick. Anyway, so that was a real incredibly positive thing. Plus the mild winter really helped. And by the way, the Diamond, there's an article in there by Emma Fuller. I don't think she's here today. But talking about the Diamond and the architecture, which is really, really nifty that I had no clue. We didn't know, Richard and I weren't that cultured to understand that stuff. But the point is that people that were experts are all about trying to make this thing work, and they came up with something that was a real work of art.
In the 8 months, we keep hitting the 8 months, but didn't I see somewhere in the book that the occupancy permit came, how close? Give us that quick timeline.
It was, the occupancy permit, it became a matter of a couple of hours. It was
Time
like,
to spare.
It was like, I can't remember,
Details.
I'm not certain, but I think it was 5:30 that afternoon they signed it. So,
Well, it got done, that's all that matters. Now, we talked about all the people involved in this partnership to make this project possible, but I'm under the impression that the media had a really important role in driving some of the community. So Phil or Bob, you want to jump in and talk about how you describe them as being some unsung heroes of the project?
I think just the support that they showed for the project. It wasn't that they were cheerleaders. It wasn't that, that ads were taken out to say, now there were, with ballpark specials and some of the individual companies that were involved with the fundraising, they would have ads in the paper. But as Richard mentioned, with the coverage that Bill Deakins and Tom Hardracourt gave, and then some excellent columns from Bill Millsaps and Jennings Cully, they were covering it as an item of news, but you could just feel that they had the support. They wanted this to happen. They wanted it to succeed. The TV stations, the radio stations were involved as well. I think it was just the whole idea of there being that positive feeling that, the media wanted to be able to see this project succeed. So I think even though that they weren't specifically cheerleaders in the process, they were really helpful in letting the private sector know what was going on, keeping them up to date with the progress of fundraising, and then once it got to the point where the stadium was being built, the updates on how the progress of the building of the Diamond was going as well.
As a practical matter, we had no money. And so we had to use, whatever the Time Dispatch and the News Leader printed, we used that as our materials as they talked about the progress. And Richard mentioned it again about what they were all over this thing. They had bought in because he had engaged them in activity. And it wasn't just in the sports, the editorial group, it was very similar. But I will tell you that, and I don't know if y'all remember the Braves Boosters video that was done by EZ 104. It was to the tune of Ghostbusters, and it was Who You Gonna Call? Braves Boosters, and so they did that on their own. And actually, I mentioned that because in a couple weeks we have a website that's going up. It's a diamondbookrva.com, and it's got a whole bunch of videos of the project, like opening night. And what they did at opening night, the dedication night, the burning of the note night, and like Channel 12 did a history of baseball in Richmond, of the baseball parks. Rick Stoss did a really wonderful piece of that. Then Ben Hallman took us through the new facility. So there are a bunch of videos on there, including there's one of Braves Boosters, and you got to watch it because it has a bunch of the politicians in the dugout saying, "Who you going to call?" And they're singing along. So people started having fun. And I think that's part of the grassroots effort. But the newspaper, but both of them were putting kind of scorecards in. They drew a diamond. That's in the book. But it shows they were helping keep track. They will let people know that this thing was working. And that's what helped the higher-ups in the companies want to say, we need to do this. We're doing this for our associates. We're doing this for people who like baseball. We're doing it for for the pride of the community. And it was an Olympic year. There was an election coming up, and Ronald Reagan was talking really positively about things. So it was just the environment. If you were truly just doing a time of the Great Recession, I don't think it would have happened. So things were really set up nicely when people said, let's get this done. And you did have, I will say this, that right now I believe that if people are passionate, they're relentless, and they take ownership over something, you can get a lot of things done. And there's a guy who wrote a book, Wisdom, Warrior Lunch, Wisdom, Warrior Lunch, about Rod Olson. And it talks about all the things we can do if you really want to get things done and you want to lead. And I think we in our own little ways, whether it be in our churches, whether it be in our businesses, whether it be other community things, if we get in there, if we're passionate about it, if we're relentless for the goal to help others, and then we're willing to take ownership and you really getting fully engaged as opposed to let somebody else do it. So.
Excellent. Well, that actually ties in. Randy, is there anything that we should know or you want to add about the general public's involvement in this project?
Yeah. Well, and first of all, I'd like to say, I think the introduction, we call it, Phil and I wrote about getting involved. And one of the things we said was, if Bobby Ukrop asks you to do something, pretty good chance you're going to do it. I think that's pretty obvious.
You haven't talked to my wife.
The community the community involvement, to me, it comes down to a change in the pronouns. It became not he's going to do it, not this wasn't Bobby Ukrop's thing. It wasn't they're going to do it. It wasn't the Richmond Braves need this. It was we're going to do it. I'm pitching in. It was us. This was going to be our ballpark. And I think you started seeing it everywhere. It was in offers that you saw for specials, ballpark specials for toilet paper. It was on grocery bags. Every grocery bag you got from Ukrop's was, I'm pitching in to build a ballpark. And it meant that, 5 cents of your purchase was going toward the ballpark. It was just a little bit, just that little bit. But all of a sudden it became ours. We wanted it. It was going to be something that we would enjoy, and it was going to be our project. It was our project. And I think that was what happened, and what really turned it toward the enthusiasm, as you said, that the company leaders suddenly saw. It was like, yeah, we are going to be part of this too, because we don't want to be left out. This is our thing.
So I see I see Joanne Cole, who's been her lifetime at the retail merchants. But the retail merchants, many retailers were involved with the Lansing Building Products, for example. There were a bunch of People's Drugstore, name of the past, Safeway. There were a lot of independent food stores as well involved. But people were encouraging other people. It's the people's facility. But then once it was built, like people began using it as a gathering place, not just baseball. Y'all may recall when we had the big retail merchant sponsored the Desert Storm Parade. We had a huge parade back there back then. So it became a very special place where we were able to honor those Americans who had given their lives and those who had been triumphant as well. And so that brought the community together, and it's kind of fueled, I guess, a positive spirit, which we like to keep going.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Joanne.
Phil, there's some specifically named areas when the Diamond opened. Share a little about that.
Randy mentioned about one of them. There were just a lot of different names, different suggestions that people had for the new stadium. There were a lot of people that wanted to keep the name Parker involved with the stadium. But I think there was a feeling that there had been so much negativity in terms of Parker Field that they were still appreciative of what Dr. Parker had done with baseball in the community and in getting Parker Field built. So if you remember when the stadium opened, when you got to the top of the steps on the main concourse, there was a large fountain that was there. That was named Parker Fountain in memory of Dr. Parker. And as Randy had mentioned earlier, there were a lot of people that wanted Frank Soden's name on the stadium. So the press box was named for him. And then one of the most beloved players and managers in the history of the Richmond Braves was Tommy Aaron. And there were a lot of people that would like to have seen the stadium named after him. So the clubhouse, the home clubhouse, what now the Squirrels are in, was named the Tommy Aaron Clubhouse. So it was a chance to be able to honor those three gentlemen, not with name on the stadium, but as part of areas inside the stadium.
Thank you. So now we're wrapping up here. How does this magnificent ballpark that was put together through such community spirit now fast forward several decades from being a state-of-the-art minor league stadium to being one that needs to be replaced or totally upgraded? How does that happen?
I think to me it's still a great ballpark and a great place to go see a ball game. Really enjoy it. But what's happened is the expectations of the teams and the vendors and the public who go to the games have changed. And I'll go back to when I was a kid. We played in a slightly slanted field, and out over shortstop there was a shed Then we had ground rules. If it hit the shed, you caught it, it was an out. But if it bounced off, it was a double. You know, you know, people aren't expecting that when they go to a professional ballpark. And our expectations changed when we found a nice level cow pasture that we could play in. And you know, fast forward and raise the level to professional stadiums. Now, people expect an experience that's different from the experience they had in 1985. They want very comfortable seats. They want amenities. They want an app that will let you order food brought to your seat. They want places to have a picnic. They want a fountain in the outfield. They want, and the players want bigger, better, nicer, more comfortable clubhouses. At the time, this was like, oh, it's wonderful. The players loved it. They had a better training room, et cetera, et cetera. Now, that's not enough. They want more. So the ballpark is still in really good shape, but it doesn't have all of the amenities that are now expected.
Doesn't have the largest Megatron ever seen for
There you go.
broadcasting, right?
Yeah.
All right, so let's wrap up here on that same note, and I'm going to flip ahead here to the end of the book. In the section you call Extra Innings, and you say, the future of the Diamond remains uncertain as this book is being published. Decades have passed, expectations for minor league stadiums have advanced, yet fans continue to enjoy baseball at this stadium. So with the calls, and we mentioned earlier about the idea of moving the park to Shockoe Bottom or wherever else, what lies ahead? What's the next step? How long will we continue as we are? Or what are you hearing? What should we know?
I would say it's in the hands of VCU and the city. And I think there will be some cooperation at some point to work that out. But they're looking at that big tract of land with the ABC warehouse, being sold. And so, but my guess is that it'll probably be, if something happens somewhere, which that'll probably be the place, it could be 2021. By the time that something new happens, it may be early, based on the timeline, the process, how long it takes. And that's why we probably wrote this book when we started feeling that way, about 6 years ago, about the process taking forever. If the thing had been renovated in 2003, we'd now be talking about what do we do next, the next renovation or a new one. And so, but I think my feeling is between VCU and the city and the people, the mood, people want to have a ballpark. The question is, how much did the public pay? You get into all these kinds of issues that are out there beyond my pay grade. But I think something good is going to happen at some point. But I wouldn't make plans yet. But it's going to be a number of years before, and the thing will still be holding up, even though it's not perfect by any means.
I'd like to say that I went from being very much neutral on, well, just, whatever you want to do, build a park, I don't care. After I worked on this book for a couple of years, it's like the Diamond is my little brother. I have a new fondness for it. It reminded me of all the good ball games I saw and the fun I've had there. And if we have a new ballpark, then the new ballpark has a very high standard to meet. And I hope we can do that in every way, in both in community involvement and in the ballpark itself.
And making it as lasting as this park has been.
Indeed.
Right, to be able to go on.
Yeah, some places have already turned over a couple times since
That's
we.
right.
Yeah.
But I would add that if you go to the website in a few weeks, you'll see this. There was a drone out there this past week taking pictures of the place. And it also showed Sportsbacker Stadium, and you can see Scott's Addition. 20 years ago, who would have thought Scott's Addition would become such a hot place? And so, and you look at all the land, we have Redskins Park. There's still a lot of land. There have been plans drawn on several occasions to make that an amateur sports facility out there with all that land. The city obviously would like to turn it into more taxes from that property. So there are lots of possibilities, but with sometimes the less government gets involved, the better chance something works. Like you think about what's happening. Not a political comment. I was just saying that, but like you look at Scott's Addition has come back. People thought that was crazy. And Bill's Barbecue has been, some of these things are going to change. And so, but I will say there's a group of people out there who actually have some plans. They think the place can be renovated in a way to make it great and spend a lot less money on it. But I think part of the problem is the location and the fact that Arthur Ashe Center is there. That's been a problem for all these years. And the city doesn't have, the school board, they just don't have the money to do what needs to be done. So that's, all those things make these things look somewhat problematic. And, but so I hope we're not, 5 years from now, we're still not talking about something happening 5 years from now again.
All right, well, we'll open up for questions. Please just wait. We'll call on you when the microphone comes around. And while we're coming down with the microphones and you're thinking about your questions, Bobby, why don't you share with us what your intentions are for the proceeds from this book?
Oh, yeah. We're not trying to make any money on this book. And we may not make any money on the book, but if any proceeds from the book, the money's going to go to the Richmond Flying Squirrels Foundation, that they're charities, Flying Squirrels charities, for the renovation of Richmond's ballparks. That is the inner city ballparks that are not in very good shape. So the Squirrels have taken that on as a project. So anything that comes out of this will go directly to that. And we're pleased about that. They'd be able to check that on the website either. I don't know if you all even knew that was a charity, that they were doing that, but they are. And so we think that's a fitting way to take whatever proceeds might come.
So don't buy one book, buy three. All right, our first question right over here.
Afternoon, and thank you all for doing this and writing the book. I actually got the book Friday night and read through it, and it's really, really remarkable. This is really for you, Richard. I have heard the story from Carlton Moffett about you all going down to Atlanta to convince Ted Turner to keep the team here, and I think that would be something interesting that you could tell the audience. It's a great story.
Sure. And again, this gets back to none of us are as smart as all of us, and it's about the private sector, and it wasn't a political statement from Bobby, but it is from me. Elected officials aren't supposed to be doing these sort of things. They're doing the things we want as we elect them. When the ballpark took on a life of its own, there was a group of people, Lee Putney, I recall, yourself, Bobby, Dick Hollander, and a handful of others and myself. We flew down to Atlanta and we met with Ted Turner, and we also met with the chamber in Atlanta to talk about the impacts that it had, the ballparks had for their community and all, and a few other folks, and we went and saw a Braves game that night. And the intent was to make it clear to Ted and to Charles Sanders at that time, who was the business manager for the Braves, that this community was really committed to this team, and they were committed to this team because they wanted the quality of life experience for their children and their adults and their memory-making experiences. They didn't want to lose a AAA team, and it was a really cool and, for me, touching experience. And clearly, the Braves management and Turner ownership was compelled by that. But I'll also say, at the end of the day, it's a business, and so there was one organization in all of this, and justifiably so, that wanted to do the right thing, but they had a profit motive. They needed a decent facility, and they needed to generate more money off of it. And yet the Braves, in my opinion, still at that time especially came to the table and did the right thing for the community too. And I think a lot of it was based on that interaction. It's a great question.
Right here in the front.
This is a little bit like that maybe for Richard also, but do ballparks like ours or the ones around the country generally break even? Is it a good deal, bad deal, or it depends?
Wow, loaded question, but in 2 minutes or less, and a great question. Ultimately, and I was listening carefully to the comments about, do you build a new ballpark or do you, basically refurbish? And there's arguments for both. As I said earlier, when I went by the Diamond, and I just really want to sprinkle on this a bit, when I went by the Diamond last night and looked at it, I go, structurally and visually, that is one of the coolest buildings anywhere in this country today. So for X dollars, somebody could go in, it really needs a renovation. There's a lot of things about it that could be improved as I walk through, and it's not for anybody missing anything, it's just age. It's tough for a ballpark on its own to make money. However, again, back to something, Bobby, you said, when you put it in the hands of the private sector, they tend to make money on it. When you put it in the hands of the public sector, it tends to not make money. So I think when it's owned by a private business, it has, because there's a profit motive. They're not, there's no side deals going on. You gotta make it happen.
Okay, I think we have our last question right here.
I'll have to admit, I'm a native Richmonder, and I have never been to the Diamond. However, tomorrow I've got a ticket to go to the Diamond.
There you go.
My question is, what should I expect besides the ball game? Why am I going? I mean, why should I return and go again?
Wait, I have one question. They have a home game? Are they home? If they're home, there'll be a game. That'll be a good reason to go.
I've lived here all my life, and I've never been to the damn Diamond.
That's amazing.
But I have a ticket tomorrow night. I'm going to go.
I thought they were out of town till Thursday. I don't think I'm wrong. What day is it?
But he got a good deal on the ticket.
What day is it? It is tomorrow. They are back tomorrow.
Tom
Tomorrow is
Hanson has
Thursday.
Okay, we'll do one more here
great.
for Tom.
It's-
I would like for you to consider the fact that the Diamond was built in the time that it takes to build a home. I mean, literally about the same time. For a budget, the general contract budget was $6.7 million. With those two things to consider, the bones are there for a substantial renovation. I'd like to think of what is there now as phase one. And if we could get it funded, phase two would add many of the amenities that people are looking for. The guts of it are there. We could make it very, very nice.
That's Tom Hanson, everybody.
And I think that's a great note to end on, so let me just finish by thank you all for participating, and for everyone here who was a part of this remarkable project that has shaped the landscape in the community now for decades. As a still relatively new Richmonder, but as a lifelong baseball fan, I'm just thrilled to have such a resource here right in our backyard. So thank you, well done. And thank you for this wonderful book. I hope you all will buy a copy.
Enjoy the game.